Welcome to The Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet. I'm your host, Mark Cashman, here with Chris. I've got a little bit of a tan on my face, McNulty.
Thanks, Mark. This week, we'll be revisiting one of our favorite episodes, the desktop diet. Summer is a time when a lot of people are traveling or vacationing and can't quite carry their desktop computer with them. It is very interesting that we wrote that for can't quite carry because last month, on my way down to Oregon, I couldn't quite carry my tablet and sent it flying into a parking lot. Where
I believe cracked is something that is in your notion of how you would describe your computer right now.
So I had 4 days, not by choice, or maybe by subconscious choice, to do all of my work on a 4-inch piece of glass known as my iPhone.
So this particular topic is something that we visited almost about a year ago in one of our earlier episodes to just talk about the desktop diet and what does it mean for people to be away from their desktop, on their mobile devices, on the tablet. And we thought it was a great time to revisit that with some new thoughts to tee up the conversation that we had back then with our engineers, but to really talk about what is your current summer experience? What have we done recently with the technology that makes it even more of a delicious diet to go without the desktop? I know for me specifically, I knew that we were going to be doing this. And so for about a week, I was traveling. I just recently went to Dublin and I went with my daughter and my son, but I knew I had some work that I needed to do. And so to be out of the office, but to be connected, I had with me an Android tablet, a Samsung. And my intention was to use it and only it for anything that I needed to do. I wasn't doing work 24/7, but there were times that I needed to review documents or create them or add to them. There were times that I needed to call in, on a conference call. And there were times that I just needed to organize and share stuff with other people that were asking about it. So primarily I was using 3 applications, but I had the Samsung tablet. I had the little cover with a built-in keyboard, so that helped a little bit. But I primarily was using the OneDrive app, the Microsoft Teams app, and the SharePoint app to keep up with the news, and of course, Outlook. Before I dive into that, have you recently done anything, with the cracked screen where you were forced yourself or you were forced into being desktopless?
Yeah, well, I was definitely forced into doing everything through my phone, and that a lot of the incremental improvements we've made with Teams, and I would also say with Outlook Mobile, have really made it pretty painless. One thing, I've always found the quirky ways that we had 5 or 6 years ago. If someone calls you and says, hey, I'm looking for blah, can you send me a link? Sure, there's a way I can open up a mini browser on a phone and do it. But now the OneDrive clients make it so much easier. One of the things I have found that I'm doing is once you get to be mobile dependent, there are some things that are unique, for example, in Outlook Mobile, the send availability feature. I will find myself at my desk sometimes if someone says, hey, can we meet? I will consciously jump over to my phone because it's so much easier for me to just go on the phone, call up the menu of available times and just send it to someone because that's much more actionable than my having to actually write August 2nd, 3 to 3:30. And I'm not a great typist. So anything I can do to eliminate that helps.
But the hand gestures that you were just doing that I was visibly seeing made it look like you're a wonderful typer. It looked a little bit like Tyrannosaurus Rex with 2 claws out.
I don't use all 10 fingers.
And then for me, what was something that I actually did more while I was traveling than when I'm here, either at my desktop or just connected to the team on a more regular basis, was actually catching up on people's SharePoint news. The news tab, which is something I show and talk about all the time, I don't use as much when I'm here at the office because I'm mostly either helping make the news or share it in other ways. But to see what other people are working on, different research projects, different features and how far along they're coming and some of the metrics about them was really nice to consume. In that point, I was actually on my phone, which is also Android, so same component, and just reading the news and either liking it or if I had a comment, I could do that right in line. But for everything else, whether it was editing a PowerPoint, reviewing or editing a Word document, replying to a conversation or sharing a file, the thing that you said about the ease of sharing your calendar, I find that as something that's super easy to do using the OneDrive app on my Android phone to just find the file I'm looking for. Usually it's in my recent, clicking the 3 ellipses and then just hitting share and having the same value and power of when we talk about sharing, but really easy to do with just a couple of clicks. And I'm sharing an entire file shared from the cloud, but from my little mobile device.
So I'm really impressed. So Android gets 3 ellipses. On iPhone, we only get 3 dots. So you get 3 ellipses?
I like to have 3 ellipses. I feel like I'm looking into the mirror of a mirror reflection of an ellipses.
So 2 things I found last week. I was on Eastern Long Island in an area with highly variable connectivity. The first is on a Teams call, we have some bandwidth sensors in the software that will say, your network doesn't seem to be optimized. Would you like to, poor call quality, would you like to turn the video off? Yes, always do that. It's just the internet is not going to magically get faster in 30 seconds. So that's usually a good clue to make sure that not only I can hear people, but that I don't come across, as one of those digitally warped voices that people ask to turn off. The other thing, and this is, I did have this temporary tablet here with me.
It's pretty.
Yeah, it's black. Surface Pro 6. Remembering to make sure that I had grabbed and synced all of my primary sources so that if I was, say, on a beach, this didn't actually happen, but hypothetically, and wanted to look at, say, a PowerPoint file, because that seems like the perfect thing to do when you're at the edge of the ocean. You want to make sure that you have it with you. There's also some wisdom in not having things with you. I was talking to Dan Holm on our team about his upcoming vacation plans. He is going to completely remove the Teams client from his phone. Because when there is value in being on vacation, and for something urgent, someone can reach me via SMS.
So that all sounds well and good to me. I'm glad that you're having a great summer so far. Let's revisit what we talked about with Mike and Dan. So today in our guest segment, we talk with Dan Costenaro and Mike Morton from the Office Online engineering team.
Later in today's episode is our FAQ section, where Mark and I discuss our most frequently asked questions, followed by upcoming events for you to explore this summer and early fall.
So stay tuned for all things exciting and new in the world of SharePoint and Microsoft 365. All right, so I think it's time to dive behind the screens, maybe behind the browser, with this topic, to go a little bit behind with the team that's building a lot of what people experience when they go desktop diet, or when they don't have any apps, really. Everything's through the browser. And so we're joined today with Mike Morton, Partner Group Program Manager on the team, on the engineering team, and Dan Costenaro. Did I pronounce that right? Costenaro. Principal Program Manager, which means...
That means I work with people on our team.
You're a people manager. That's what I thought. I just love that it's manager. Manager squared. Maybe
we love it too.
We'll put it in the show notes as manager squared. But we invited you guys in because the topic, but certainly where you focus is Office Online. And I'm going to let you describe a little bit more about that. But when we think of Office Online, and certainly from the SharePoint side of things, sometimes it is. I'm looking at a document. But I think also it's in search results. You're using the Office Online for previews. And when you're embedding it in various places, maybe news article or a web page, it's that experience. So you probably have a lot of touch points, not just SharePoint, right? And also thinking commercial and consumer.
That's right.
But first, just thanks for coming on the show and just give a sense of who you are. Mike Morton.
Yep, I'm really happy to be here. I am basically run the Office Online program management team. I don't have the title program manager, but I guess that would be the logical conclusion. But effectively, the engineering, the program management team for Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote Online. So those are the core sort of Office apps. I actually worked on SharePoint. I was one of the original program managers when SharePoint started back in 1999.
All right.
So I worked on SharePoint from 99 to 2007. So if you ask me deep SharePoint questions, I probably can't answer, but I can tell you how it worked.
Let's ask a little, maybe a workflow manager question.
Whatever happened to the web clipping dashboard?
The web clipping dashboard. You're already asking me things that are too difficult.
Awesome. Well, before we dive into it, Dan, just a quick rundown of who you are. We know you're a manager of manager.
Right. Only 2 this time.
Only 2.
Mike is 3. Yes.
I understood.
Right. So I started at Microsoft in 2001. I worked on the Outlook team for a long time. And then I moved to work on Mike's team about 5-ish years ago. So, the same at Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote Online. Just the same versions you're used to running in the browser.
Awesome. I'm going to actually jump to my second question because now knowing that a little bit, my real first experience with anything what we call now Office Online was OA, was the Office Outlook web app. And I have it in here just as more of a tee up for you, but you started us. That was the first time where I really was fooled by what was in the browser because the team who was given the demo, they had their browser full screen. They were showing Outlook web app, and they were just doing hey, here's what's new for Outlook. And then they pulled the rug out from under us and said, actually, you've been looking at Outlook web app. And it was really cool.
Yep.
But, okay, step back from that. I'm thankful for everything you do in Outlook web app because that saves me sometimes. But just curious, that history, just give us where did Office Online evolve and not just what was it called before, but really why did it come about?
Yeah, it is really interesting, actually, even starting with OA, because that actually predates a lot of the web technologies for sort of really interactive web experiences. It used to be, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was very difficult to build a web application that resembled what we would have in sort of a typical sort of Windows app. And OA was really one of the first. One of sort of the interesting stories is we actually had a memo and I think it was about 2005, written by Steven Sinofsky. He used to run Office, talking about, at the time he used the term Office Web Companions. But he basically said, hey, we're going to build web-based versions of Office apps, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, even OneNote at that time. And it ended up we didn't start working on it until about 2 or 3 years later. But it actually predates a lot of the competition. So if you look at all the sort of the various experiences out there, and there are a lot of web productivity solutions today, the actual premise of it is well before the competition. And so it was really a belief about having Office everywhere. And mail was kind of an inspiration. The idea was, even at that time, the idea that you couldn't get to your mail anywhere, that you'd have to be on your Win32 desktop, that you couldn't get to it from any machine with a browser or any even mobile phone. We said, hey, we want to have that same concept for Office, right? The idea that your Office documents would be locked in one place and that you couldn't get them from wherever you were just didn't make sense to us. And of course, SharePoint is a key part of that, right? In order for us to have those documents available anywhere, the documents can't be on your hard drive. They have to be up there in the cloud. And so the real vision was sort of universal access, being able to get to your documents, be able to share, collaborate, work together. And that started actually quite a while ago. The engineering effort started a little bit after that, but really the inspiration has got pretty deep roots in the Office organization.
So you might have joined after?
Yes.
Or so just from maybe the 5 years ago, if you jump from where we started and we'll get to where we are, what's that middle ground, when we hit some of those inflection points of maybe not just companion, but the tool that people are actually going to really use day to day?
Right. So when I joined the team, Mike was kind of giving me the the run through. Thank you. The run through.
We'll touch on the run around later.
Excellent. Here's where we're at, and we're at this inflection point where for a long time, we've called them the Office Web Companions because we felt that they're a good supplement to running Office. And we kind of want to turn a corner and say, you could be fully productive in the web if you wanted to. Of course, Office, the Win32 clients are very rich, and they've been around for a long time, and people really love them. But there was a growing number of people who wanted to just work in the web. And hey, I just want to be productive. And so that's kind of how OA was inspired as well. Hey, we know that there will be a lot of people on the planet that will never want to leave using Win32 Outlook. But there are some people who are pretty happy with just booting a browser. And so that's kind of when I joined the team. We switched from the word companion to apps. And so we call them the Office Web Apps. And then later we renamed it Office Online to sort of reflect that it's in the cloud. And people they thought app and they thought, oh, I'm going to install this on my phone. Oh, no, that's not what we meant. We just meant it's real and not just a companion. So, and we're still struggling a little bit with the name because Office Online kind of sounds like Office 365, kind of sounds like a lot of the same things. Yeah. But when you say Word in the cloud, people are like, oh, in a browser. Yeah, that's it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about that inflection. I remember about 6 years ago, before I joined Microsoft, I was an MVP, I was CTO at Dell, and I wrote an article about a projection that at some point in the future, we're not going to be talking about Office 365 as a limiting factor, but about the things that you can do exclusively or better in a cloud-based implementation than you can do in traditional on-premises environments. Kind of projecting forward, when you look at that core trio, especially Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, do you see that as an eventual end state for where those applications go?
Yeah, absolutely. The cloud is really transformational. When we think about taking the apps forward, traditionally Office has been about productivity. We've made it really great to make beautiful, professional-looking documents, and of course that remains a core value proposition. But when you think going forward, I'll pick sort of two areas. One is sort of teamwork, and the second is intelligence. A foundation of teamwork is having everybody being able to work on the same document. So basics like real-time co-authoring, but then more sophisticated things like being able to say, hey, Dan, can you work on this section? Being able to mention somebody, having a really rich activity and version history so I can see who exactly changed which parts of my document. Maybe being able to share a document and say, hey, I only want Mike to add comments to this section, and I want Dan to have sort of full access rights. And so collaboration is kind of a key part. And then the second part is intelligence. We really want to make sure that we have services in the back end that really help you get your work done more efficiently. This can be everything from very basics, like helping you write and be more efficient by saying, hey, this terminology, if I try to say, we want to have somebody man the booth. We're like, oh, that's a gender-specific term. Maybe you want to say staff the booth to use, a term that's sort of more appropriate to far more sophisticated things. Like I have an Excel spreadsheet. We have intelligence in the cloud that can look at that spreadsheet and find anomalies, suggest, hey, you want to make this pivot table or pivot chart or these things that are more difficult. Having you actually find insights and learn and discover stuff based not just on rules, but true deep in machine learning.
And it's not just recommending it to them. Sometimes it's what used to be many clicks and configuration and knowledge is just a yes.
That's right.
Do that for me. And
Absolutely.
It just does it. That's great. So I know one of the things that you promote is that transition. If they are now apps companion online and how you describe them as being compatible as far as, depending on whether you use one or the other or both. You talk about that easy transition. And I know just generally if I move from online to the desktop, I usually think of I know why, I know when, but talk about maybe the technical side of it, when somebody transitions, what that means and how you think about it. But then also we want to land on what are those scenarios when somebody can go just online and then maybe when they need the desktop, at least at this point in time.
Yeah, sure. So at a technical level, for starters, just performance and seamlessness is a key thing for us. We really want to make sure that people don't feel like they're having to make a choice. If they want to really quickly go to the clients, they don't have to debate, is it going to, some people actually even have a hard time understanding that the clients can work with documents in the cloud. Like they might be using the web, they think it's the most up-to-date, and it may seem obvious, and I suspect a lot of the listeners on this podcast, it's obvious, but a lot of the end users of companies still have a disconnection that they can use these sort of traditional rich clients live and directly against the cloud. And so the first part is we want to make it as seamless and as fast as possible. So when the user wants to go to the rich client, it feels, and we often use this term, alive and connected. That kind of inherently comes in our browser apps where the browser sort of people assume is connected because it's in the browser. But we want to have that same goal in the rich client so people actually realize we've done even little small things like put save to SharePoint actually in the title bar in the Office apps. It sounds like such a small thing, but it's had a big impact on sort of usability for users. Your question about when, right now there is still no doubt that the rich clients are the native clients are the place with the most functionality. So if you're going to really try to create that sales deck with a fine-tuning of your animations and transitions and the box in the right place, or if you're finance and doing an Excel spreadsheet where you're really trying to calculate and do a lot of things, the rich clients are the place that you're going to have that transition. More and more, we're seeing people being able to do more, a lot of their core tasks in the web. But we think that's a real asset for us because you don't really have to make a choice. You can use the web, you can have sort of the ease of use of that, the great collaboration, and then when you need that power, we have it, hopefully quickly and seamlessly at the,
since you were talking about teamwork before, one thing, and granted, we're all for Microsoft, so we have a little bit of a selection bias.
Yep.
But, I've found that when we're really emphasizing teamwork, especially for co-authoring real-time collab in the same document, it's a better experience to be in the web. You can still do it, absolutely, Please, I'm not saying you can't do real-time co-authoring with the rich clients, but we found it to be a really, a preferred experience in many cases. If you think about how a lot of web experiences are, and it's sort of the modern world, is there sort of what I think of as the ESPN or the CNBC approach to user experience, and that there's a crawl over here, there's information that's popping up, we've got things coming. One thing I will always adore Word for is the ability to tune everything else and just have kind of a pure authoring experience where the focus is on the words. And as long as we keep that going, I'm a huge fan.
Yep. So we really like the scenario of I'm going to go to the place that I need to think, I'm going to click the button, and I'm going to get a space where I can type.
Right.
And I think Word, Excel, and PowerPoint Online excel at that. And so we find that that's a workflow that's pretty common, and especially when you have a shared space, like, oh, you're going to go create this in a team, and there's a place where in Teams you can make new documents. I'm going to create this in a SharePoint site where we all know where our team site is. And then just that collecting feedback, I think you mentioned track changes. That'll be live very soon. So that'll be a scenario that you can do online as well.
Oh, excellent.
And like Mike was alluding to earlier, all those collaborative things where you just want to see what's changed over time and the history of what's going. Yeah. So those are all scenarios that we feel are really, really feel great in the web.
So as many of the audiences may have seen during SharePoint conference, one of the things across the board we're trying to do with SharePoint is bringing kind of that unified file experience. We've seen it with things like the share dialog and all the places where we're lighting up all the metadata that we have about that. We've got this rich history of the changes and collaboration and what's happened since last you were in the file. Like, how do you see that intelligence being something that you can mine through the Office clients?
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the core center, in fact, we have a lot of research that shows people don't collaborate on documents because they don't actually trust each other. It's not so much that they don't trust other people in that they think they're good people, is that they don't actually have faith that they're going to write things the way that they would write them or order things. And so really having very fine-grained activity is one of the big investments that we're making in Office. And so in the future, when you browse to a document, it'll actually say, hey, while you're away, John, Amy, and Nick made changes to this document. You can click on it, and it'll actually take you through and highlight and show Nick added this picture, John changed this table. And we find that's not just helpful for you reviewing and actually kind of tracking changes, but it actually helps John, Amy, and Nick feel more confident they can just go and directly edit that document, sort of building that sort of cultural trust. And SharePoint's the key. SharePoint is the activity store in the back end that's actually storing all that data. And kind of your point on the workflow, really starting in the cloud is the key, right? Classically, some people might have started on their local hard drive, work on it, and then publish it up in the cloud. In the future, we sort of see, hey, if you actually want to work against your hard drive locally, it will be like, error, are you sure you want to work locally, right? We want to say the default behavior is everything, you just click File New, it's in the cloud, unless you have some very specific reason, that's how you work, because it really enables these great collaboration scenarios.
I keep my desktop itself is a OneDrive synchronized folder, so it's impossible
Good job,
to be away
Chris.
from the cloud.
Small clap for Chris.
Yeah.
Well, one of the personas I know that you guys probably live and breathe is what we used to call the kiosk worker, and now in reference, it's just F1, which stands for first line worker. When you're building for that persona, and maybe when you're building for sort of halftime Mark and Chris when we start in the browser, but we might have some scenarios where we move to the desktop, how do you think about F1? How do you think about that first line worker?
Yeah, for sure. So in many cases, the first-line worker, for starters, they won't have access to the native clients. And so there you really have to make sure about having the online versions really do the end-to-end scenarios that they need. When we first started researching it, we thought, a lot of these scenarios, it might be like a barista at a coffee shop or a retail employee at a big box store. How complicated could their scenarios be? And actually, it turns out that these first-line workers really do real work. There are cases where they might get a brochure from headquarters, and the brochure might be generic, but they might update it with the local specials and the things that are actually part of that area. And so they're actually editing Word documents that might have tables and pictures and layouts and sort of complicated parts. And so we really are making sure that we're a great experience for them. But simplicity is really the key. In a lot of these cases, they're not trained knowledge workers. Their main job might be something else. And so we're really focusing on making it as easy and fast for them to use it as possible.
So do you come across not just a single persona, but a variety of personas?
Definitely.
When you're thinking across the various apps or the collection of, when they think of, this is my Office suite in the browser, what are maybe some variances when you think about the different tools or the different type of people?
Sure. Well, we get a lot of data and a lot of input from people who use the product, and it varies quite wildly. What people think is just table stakes. I can't believe you didn't include A, or I can't believe you didn't include B. And you talk to a different group of people, and they don't even think about A and B, and they talk about C and D. And so the normalization of that is complicated. But a lot of things tend to be, the basics of copy-paste has to work flawlessly with any kind of content from anywhere, everywhere. And so there's a couple of things like that we can normalize across all people and all the way that they use the product, that we say, this has to be excellent. And then there's just scenarios that we can unlock where you say, there's somebody who, like Mike was referring to, is going to edit a very complex document that has a bunch of layout. We'd say, well, the layout's really challenging for us to get perfect because there's a lot of code in Word we'd have to replicate in JavaScript. But if we can render that pretty close for a frontline worker, they don't really care as much. They're like, okay, the text is correct. Now, if you were going to look at that from a copy editing perspective, that person would use Word for it. And so it tends to be when you get the superpowers of Office that have been built over many decades, those things are tending to be the things that people want to reach for the clients. But if you're just doing some quick edits, if you're just updating something quick, if you just want to throw something on a sheet like you were talking about before, I'm going to write a blog post. Like, it doesn't really matter if it's formatted perfectly. What matters is you have the heading sections right and people can type in the middle and the bullets work. And so we find that those scenarios are normalizing. And so when you get to the superpower of formatting or the superpower of some of the Office tricks that you've been using for 20 years to get it to look exactly a certain way, people will reach for the clients for those.
Oh, I think it's nice is you're doing a lot of work with some of the intelligence and some of the sort of auto it does it for you. You know, you just really are focused on this is the text, this is the sentence, this is the image, and then do some magic. But now that you're embedding in Microsoft Teams, you're embedding in news and pages and SharePoint, you're in search results, again, consumer, commercial. One question before we turn into maybe the roadmap that was just announced at the SharePoint conference. What do you do from a scale perspective? Scaling that for the world, different than telling somebody, you know, IT pro, here's how you scale it on premises. How has that evolved and maybe the unique challenges it presents?
Yeah, there are a couple parts of scaling. For starters, there's actually scaling the app experience. You just talked about the experience, you know, within the context of things like Teams and OA. And there we're actually doing things to make it possible. One of the big investments that we talked about at the SharePoint conference is actually minimizing some of the Chrome of our UI and having the collaboration stuff take more center stage and having some of the commanding take less, which is really critical if you're going to be in a place like Teams, making sure the experience is coherent to the user. Then you can talk about scaling on the back end. We've worked really hard to make sure that our service takes advantage of Azure and a lot of the great worldwide scale out of our capabilities. And so when we say Office Online everywhere, we mean that in a lot of ways. We mean that against a bunch of different hosts. So when we talk about hosts, we talk about things like SharePoint and OneDrive, but there's also Exchange and Teams and Yammer as first party. We have third party deals. We won't talk about some of them in this particular audience, but we have, you know, wherever customers are, Office is sort of part of that. You know, even think about other geographies. We have partners with, you know, companies in China and Russia and other locations that have sort of different sort of local competitors and so those kind of regions. So our goal is to really make sure that Office is a ubiquitous tool that people can count on and can share and can say, hey, no matter who I work with, I know they can use, you know, the latest version of Office. We
want to thank you, obviously, for your time to come in here today, but I think more to thank you for the work that you're doing, because the way that it complements SharePoint, you know, for the things that get Chris and up in the morning in terms of our work, pays off, you know, because in terms of people working with their documents, sharing them, and the experience of no matter who you send it to, you'll be able to know that they can see it, work on it, share it if they need to further beyond that. So that's really great, and I thank you for your work. But thank you for your time.
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
Up next, our frequently asked questions of the week. We've looked back at the desktop diet, but now we are going to look forward. In real time, we want to explore some questions that Mark and I have been getting recently. Mark, what's a question you've been hearing recently?
Well, in this realm, since I've been taking on a little bit more of my OneDrive hat next to my SharePoint hat, I've gotten a lot of questions around the difference between these different entry points for OneDrive, specifically OneDrive for the web and OneDrive on my mobile device, either iOS or Android. And the big question is, are there any feature gaps? Like, do I have to go to the web to do X, Y, or Z? And I think the main answer that I give is really walking them through all the things you can do with OneDrive, the app for iOS or Android. And it really is common to what you would do in the web. Of course, you can see your files, you can access them. If you need to edit them, you can, of course, open them up into the connected Office apps if it were an Office document. But when it comes to things like sharing, seeing thumbnails, viewing your recent list, discovering new content with AI, all of that is baked into the app. Of course, it's in the web, but it very much is in the app. Big difference that I see, and you can maybe tell me your perspective on it, is if I'm on OneDrive mobile app, things I can't do is like start a workflow. I can't do some of the richer capabilities. I can't always see full analytics as far as file activity, some of those things. But I know the team's working on it as far as that, you know, not being such a delta. But pretty much between web and mobile, I don't see a whole lot of difference besides just screen real estate.
Yeah, I think the core experiences are the same. I think the thing to be mindful of is few people collaborate or focus on one project or one team for 8 hours on a mobile device the same way you might at a desktop. So as a result, some of those deep dive scenarios, like give me the analytics and the trending on all of my material, you're less likely to even want to do that on your phone in the first place. So I think that's okay. One of the questions we've been asked frequently since SharePoint Conference and since Build is, what is the Fluid Framework and what does it mean for the future of SharePoint and the future of Office Online? I think it's really important to look at Fluid Framework in the context of the desktop diet. The more we move to different form factors, things like smartphones, the next generation of visor technologies or speaker systems, you have to recognize that those devices don't have as much processing power on them as a full-blown desktop PC would. So you need to be very nimble and efficient. So you want to shift as much of that processing elsewhere as possible. We're moving with things like files on demand. The principal storage is going to be handled by the cloud. You can just bring down the files as you need them. The same thing is true about being able to find things and being able to work all the way through a giant PowerPoint file. A really large Excel file is massively inefficient. One of the core attributes of Fluid Framework is we're going to break each file down into components. Do you remember, this is like getting to the Wayback Machine, do you remember Taligent?
Taligent. T-E-L-L?
T-A-L-I-G-E-N-T.
The answer is no.
Taligent was an early 1990s initiative that IBM championed to be able to create object-oriented file systems. And so the idea was, let's break all the files down into their individual pieces so that we can reference them elsewhere and recombine them in different formats. And it was a neat idea, but the technology and the processing power, I don't think was really there. And Microsoft was looking at SQL-based file systems, and we're now in a cloud era. So all of those constructs are worth going back and taking a look at. Basically, the idea of the Fluid Framework is if I have a Word document, let's say, and I have header text and an image and a graphic and an embedded video and all those different pieces, how do I break them all out into individual components so that I can, if I have a table in an Excel file and I put it in a Word document and then I take that table and paste it into Teams, it's really just the same object. What I see is just a pointer back to a table object that lives in the cloud. What does that mean? It means I can actually collaborate and co-author on that table. You can be in Word. Our production team could be in Microsoft Teams. I could be in Excel, but we're all still going to be able to see exactly the same material at the same time. So what does it mean for the future of Office Online? It means that you're going to be able to extend collaboration not just to more people, but to more apps on the same information.
Yeah, I will definitely put a link in the show notes so you can see what does the Fluid Framework look like and what does it do. But the promise is definitely there in terms of making it easier to work with others and making it easier to experience components of the information where it makes sense and way extended beyond what you would think of today. So those are our recent or frequent asked questions, and certainly we hope that you always ask us what your most frequently asked question is if we can address them. But it is now time to move on to upcoming events. So, Chris, let's talk about events. We like to start always with SharePoint Saturdays. These are great opportunities for users, IT developers to learn from and engage with their local community. I think that's the most important thing. It's local, it's easy to get to, and free. It's
absolutely free.
Free.
And what day of the week are SharePoint Saturdays usually held on, Mark?
I think they're on, Saturday.
The one between Friday and Sunday, whatever that is.
Yes, so they're a great time to plug in. It is always, obviously, a great time outside of the work to plug in and take that moment to join in your community and learn from a lot of great experts that fly in and give you all that great training. So you can always find what's going on near you by going to spsevents.org. And we want to highlight on July 27th is a fun big one closer to where Chris came from before he moved here, and that is?
SharePoint Saturday, New York. John Levesque, who's a senior program manager on the Microsoft Flow product team, will be our keynote speaker. It'll be held at the Microsoft Technology Center right in Times Square, right over there on 8th Avenue. I've spoken at this event many times. It's a great way to get engaged with Microsoft and with the local community.
And they've got a nice Twitter handle to follow that's pretty active. That's SPSNYC. On August 3rd, there is one in Omaha, Nebraska. You can follow them at SPS Omaha, and that's taking place at the Mammal Hall on Pine Street. If you're familiar with Omaha, you should be able to no problem find where the SPS Saturday in Omaha is.
And let's complete the trifecta. August 10th in Charlotte, North Carolina, at CA Spug. That is where SharePoint Saturday Charlotte will be. Again, I've spoken at this event many times. This year, our own Sean Squires from the Microsoft Product Engineering team will be keynoting. That'll be held at UNC Center City.
You know, you've said you've attended a few of these. You sure they shouldn't have renamed them SharePoint McNulty Day?
I'm quite sure they shouldn't have named them. We want people to attend.
The next is the SharePoint Fest Seattle. This is August 19th to the 23rd, and that's sharepointfest.com/Seattle. Here you'll find 2 keynotes, one Microsoft and one in an outside perspective, pre-event workshops. There are about 150 breakout sessions. There'll be a Microsoft AMA and a ton more. There's really something for everyone at a SharePoint Fest, specifically around SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Azure, BI, you name it, they'll have it for both IT, dev, and users. So if you're in Seattle, August 19th through the 23rd, go to the Washington State Convention Center or follow all the action on Twitter at SharePoint Fest.
Coming up later in August, you can definitely tell that the multiverse is starting to explode as the children start disappearing into school. SP TechCon Boston coming back again, August 25th to 28th. It'll cover a broad range of SharePoint and Office 365 topics, half-day and full-day workshops, a Microsoft keynote, general sessions, and so much more. Visit sptechcon.com/east and on Twitter at sptechcon.
And I'm just going to tee up the next one, but for you to describe, because I think you're actually attending it. It is the Quest The Experts Conference in Charleston, South Carolina. Tell us about that.
That's right. So Quest is a long-time partner of Microsoft. I was at Quest 10 years ago. Quest became part of Dell. It broke up. It reformed. And Quest is going back to their roots. The Quest Experts Conference is a chance to bring hundreds of people together to talk about Quest and Microsoft technologies across a broad range of identity and security and database management, collaboration technologies. There'll be a lot of sessions on SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. I'll be speaking there about Teams and SharePoint integration as part of my core note session. So that'll be August 27th to 28th. The URL is long, so we'll just put those in the show notes.
And the last one we want to always note as we lead up to it, because it's a big event for Microsoft, it is Ignite 2019. That will be in Orlando, Florida this year, November 4th through the 8th. This is where you can expect to connect with 25,000 other individuals across 1,000 sessions focused on software development, security, architecture, IT sessions galore. There'll be about 200 plus hands-on experiences where there'll be the innovation centers around security, cloud, and hybrid. Of course, there's a vision keynote with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, followed by technology keynotes to get the latest Microsoft news right from the Microsoft tech leaders and, of course, some of our featured customers. Beyond the individual event, we also want to note Ignite the Tour, which is a big event beyond the event. These are more regionally focused around the globe, and all the cities have now been posted through 2019 and into the first half of 2020. We'll put a link in the show notes to all the cities that are available, and think about Ignite the Tour as like a little mini Ignite if you can't make the big Ignite.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to reemphasize that. So in the product team, we definitely have some big news that we're going to be disclosing at Ignite. And when we think about Ignite the Tour, that's 30 cities around the world. And for many of our audience who can't come to Florida this fall, it'll be our best opportunity to introduce some of those new technologies, let you put your hands on them, let us take it out on the road, and of course, learn from our first experience of this with our customers about what we need to do to get our technologies ready.
Yeah, and it's important to know that from Ignite in November, all of the Ignite the Tour sessions after that actually replicate a lot of that same content. So you're always up to speed, never feel like you're out of sync with information we share across the year. So for that, visit Microsoft.com/Ignite, and on Twitter, you can follow at @MS_Ignite.
Well, that's the show. Thanks for listening. We want to also thank our guests Dan Costenaro and Mike Morton from Microsoft's online engineering team.
Check out our show page for links to all of what we discussed today and more. Go to aka.ms/theintrozone.
We love hearing from listeners, so please send your questions and feedback for the Microsoft 365 product teams.
You can use email to contact us at theinterzone@microsoft.com or out on Twitter @SharePoint, @mcashman, and @cmcnulty2000.
Tell all your friends and colleagues about our show. Please subscribe at your local surf beach on the east end of Long Island or wherever you get your podcasts.
I think Chris has gotten too much of the summer sun. Thanks so much for listening. We're your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. This has been The Interzone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet.